I never thought our 20-year marriage would unravel because of our daughter coming home from college. For 15 years, Sarah and I had a comfortable routine. Predictable dinners, weekend movie nights, and vacations to the same cabin by Lake Michigan. Then Zoe returned with her psychology degree, and suddenly my wife transformed. New clothes, late nights out, mysterious text messages. The woman I married disappeared, replaced by someone desperate to reclaim her youth. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe to follow our journey. When I think back on my life with Sarah before all this happened, the word that comes to mind is comfortable. We had built a good life together over 20 years of marriage. We met when we were both 22, fresh out of college and full of dreams. I was starting my career at an architectural firm in Chicago, and she was pursuing her passion for literature as an English teacher at the local high school. Our chemistry was immediate. Within a year we were married, and a year after that our daughter Zoe was born. Our home in suburban Chicago was everything we had dreamed of. A 2-story colonial with a big backyard where Zoe could play. I had worked my way up to senior architect at my firm, designing commercial spaces throughout the Midwest. Sarah had been teaching at Westfield High for 18 years and was beloved by students and faculty alike. Our weekday routine was nearly sacred. Wake up at 6, coffee together before work separate days. Then dinner at 6:30 sharp. Weekends meant yard work for me, grading papers for Sarah, and movie night every Saturday with homemade pizza. For 20 years, this predictable pattern gave us security and comfort. We were not the most exciting couple, but we were happy. At least I thought we were. We had successfully raised Zoe to be independent and thoughtful. She was now 19 and had just finished her freshman year at Northwestern, majoring in psychology. We were proud of her intelligence and drive. When Zoe announced she would be coming home for the entire summer, Sarah spent days preparing her room, cooking her favorite meals, and planning family outings. I was excited too. Our house had felt emptier since she left for college, and I looked forward to having our family complete again. The Zoe who returned, however, was not the same girl who had left for college. She walked with a new confidence, spoke with authority about topics we had never discussed, and seemed to analyze every interaction between Sarah and me with a clinical eye. During dinner on her second night home, she casually mentioned that her psychology professor had discussed how many couples her parents' age were settling for mediocrity. I laughed it off. What did a 19-year-old know about long-term relationships? But I noticed Sarah did not laugh. Instead, she asked Zoe questions about what her professor had said about concepts like personal growth and self-actualization. I dismissed it as harmless curiosity. 3 days after Zoe returned home, she convinced Sarah to go shopping. I thought nothing of it until they returned with bags from stores Sarah had never shown interest in before. That evening, Sarah modeled outfits that looked like they belonged on someone a decade younger than a 42-year-old high school teacher. Tight jeans, cropped tops, platform shoes. I complimented her because she seemed happy, but privately wondered what had prompted this sudden change. The next week, Sarah came home with her hair cut short and dyed platinum blonde. For 15 years, she had worn her natural brown hair in the same shoulder-length style. The woman looking back at me was almost unrecognizable. When I asked what inspired the change, Zoe answered for her. "Your mom deserves to feel beautiful and current." Her old look was aging her. Sarah nodded in agreement, checking herself in every reflective surface she passed. That evening, I noticed her constantly on her phone, scrolling through Instagram and taking selfies to post. This was bizarre behavior for a woman who had previously limited her social media use to occasional family photos on Facebook. Soon, Sarah was using words and phrases I had never heard from her before, referring to things as fire or saying something slapped when she enjoyed it, calling me bestie in a tone that somehow made me feel less like her husband and more like a casual acquaintance. 2 weeks after Zoe returned home, Sarah canceled our standing Friday dinner date. We had gone to Antonio's Italian restaurant every Friday for the last 5 years, but that night she and Zoe were attending a pop concert downtown. She did not invite me, And when I asked if I could join, there was an awkward pause before she explained it was a mother-daughter thing. That was the first time I felt a pang of worry. Not jealousy exactly, but concern. I was happy to see Sarah excited and energetic. In truth, it reminded me of the more adventurous woman I had married. The one who would spontaneously suggest weekend road trips or midnight swims in Lake Michigan. Those aspects of her personality had gradually faded as we settled into parenthood and careers. "You are being controlling, Brian," she said, her voice sharper than I was used to. "Just because you are content to be stuck in your ways does not mean I have to be. I am not dead yet." The words stung more than she knew. Had she been unhappy all this time? Had our comfortable life been slowly suffocating her? I went to bed that night with questions circling my mind, the distance between us in our king-sized bed feeling wider than ever before. The changes in Sarah accelerated over the next few weeks. What started as a new haircut and some youthful clothes transformed into a complete lifestyle overhaul. She began going out several nights a week always, with vague explanations about meeting friends. When I asked which friends, she would mention names I had never heard before in 20 years of marriage. Jennifer from yoga, Amanda from the book club, Marcus from the coffee shop writing group. Marcus. Since when did Sarah join a writing group? And since when did she have male friends? She met without me. She had never shown interest in writing beyond what was required for her teaching job. Now suddenly, she was part of a group that met weekly at a downtown coffee shop, always returning home late with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Her phone became an extension of her hand, but also a closely guarded secret. She would turn the screen away when I walked into the room, or quickly switch apps if I glanced over. Several times I noticed her stepping outside to take calls, her voice too low for me to hear through the windows. When had we started keeping secrets? The physical changes continued as well. Her wardrobe now contained clothes I could never imagine her wearing before. Low-cut tops, dresses that hugged every curve, heels so high I worried about her ankles. She started wearing makeup daily, experimenting with bright colors and dramatic styles I had never seen on her before. A new perfume replaced the subtle vanilla scent she had worn our entire marriage. This new fragrance was bold, almost aggressive in its sensuality. Most alarming was her sudden obsession with fitness. Sarah had always been reasonably active, taking walks around the neighborhood and doing occasional yoga. Now she was at the gym every morning at 5, attending spin classes and working with a personal trainer named Troy. She downloaded apps to track her calories and steps, constantly checking them throughout the day. She would scrutinize her reflection, pinching invisible fat at her waist, asking me if I thought she looked different, thinner, younger. Through all of this transformation, Zoe was not just supportive but actively encouraging. One evening I overheard them talking in the kitchen while I was supposed to be watching television in the living room. "Mom, you have been living his life for 20 years, Zoe said. "It is time to figure out who Sarah is, not just Mrs. Brian Thompson." "But what if he cannot accept who I really am?" Sarah replied, her voice small. "Then that is his problem, not yours. You only get one life. Are you going to spend all of it making someone else comfortable at the expense of your own happiness?" I nearly stormed into the kitchen then to defend myself against accusations I had somehow imprisoned my wife in an unhappy existence. But something held me back. Was there truth in what Zoe was saying? Had I been so caught up in our routine that I failed to notice Sarah slowly disappearing into my shadow? The next day I confronted Zoe while Sarah was at her new writing group. "What exactly are you telling your mother about our marriage?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Zoe looked at me with the clinical detachment of a therapist rather than the warmth of a daughter. "Nothing. She has not already felt for years, Dad." In my developmental psychology class, we learned about midlife awakening. It is different from a midlife crisis, which is what you probably think Mom is having. A crisis is reactive and destructive. An awakening is about reclaiming parts of yourself that got lost along the way. Do not psychoanalyze our family with your freshman psychology. I snapped. You have been home 3 weeks, and suddenly you are an expert on a 20-year marriage. Zoe's expression hardened. Maybe I just helped Mom see what she was afraid to admit. That she gave up everything to fit into your perfect, boring life. When was the last time you asked her what she wanted? Really asked, and really listened. I had no answer, which only fueled my frustration. Had I been such a terrible husband? Had I forced Sarah into some mold of my creation? It did not feel true, but doubt had begun to creep in around the edges of my certainty. As June turned to July, the distance between Sarah and me grew wider. Intimate moments became rare, with Sarah always claiming exhaustion or headaches when I reached for her at night. My attempts to reconnect through planning special dates were met with excuses or rescheduling that never materialized. Our conversations, once flowing and comfortable, became stilted and superficial. She would answer my questions about her day with one-word responses while texting someone else. When I tried to discuss deeper topics, she would sigh and say she did not have the energy for heavy conversations. Most hurtful were the new criticisms she leveled at me. Comments about my clothes looking outdated. Suggestions that I should consider trying a different hairstyle or growing a beard. Questions about why I still enjoyed watching baseball games or playing golf with the same friends I had known for decades. "Do you ever want to try something new?" she asked one evening, frowning at my favorite sweater. "You have been wearing the same style since we met." "I like what I like," I responded defensively. "Since when is consistency a character flaw?" "Since it became an excuse for stagnation," she replied, turning back to her phone. By mid-July, I was beginning to wonder if this was more than a phase. Was this the beginning of the end of our marriage? Was she preparing to leave me for a more exciting life without the baggage of a predictable husband? Then I found the first piece of evidence that my fears might be justified. While doing laundry, I emptied Sarah's pockets and found a receipt from La Petite Maison, an expensive French restaurant downtown that we had never visited together. The receipt showed dinner for two with an expensive bottle of wine dated on an evening when Sarah had told me she was at her writing group. I told myself there could be an innocent explanation. Perhaps she had gone with Zoe or a female friend. But why lie about it? I began paying closer attention, noticing patterns that had escaped me before. The way she would jump when her phone chimed with certain notifications. How she would step outside to take calls at odd hours. The unexplained absences that extended later and later into the night. Her vague explanations about girls' nights out but returning with stories that seemed rehearsed and lacking detail. The final piece of evidence appeared in early August. While looking for car keys in the entryway table drawer, I found a hotel key card from the Langham, a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. We had never stayed there. When I asked Sarah about it casually, she snatched it from my hand. "Oh, that is nothing," she said quickly. "Just from a teachers' conference last month. I forgot to turn it in." But Sarah had not mentioned any conference. And the summer break meant there were no school functions happening. The lie was so transparent it left me breathless with hurt and confusion. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Night after night I would lie awake beside Sarah, listening to her steady breathing while my mind raced with scenarios each more painful than the last. Was she meeting someone at that hotel? Who had she dined with at that expensive restaurant? What were in those text messages she guarded so carefully? My performance at work suffered noticeably. Twice in 1 week I submitted designs with significant errors that my team had to scramble to correct. My boss Thomas called me into his office to ask if everything was all right at home. I mumbled something about seasonal allergies affecting my sleep, but his skeptical expression told me he was not convinced. Desperate for perspective, I met my best friend Jackson for drinks after work. Jackson and I had known each other since college, and he had been the best man at my wedding. If anyone could offer clear-headed advice, it would be him. "Brian, you look like hell," he said as I slid into the booth across from him at our regular bar. "I feel like hell," I admitted then, proceeded to unload everything that had happened since Zoe returned home. The transformation, the secrecy, The hotel, key card, all of it. Jackson listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each revelation. "You have two options," he said finally. "Either confront Sarah directly with what you know and demand answers, or hire a private investigator to get concrete evidence before you approach her. But you cannot continue like this. It is destroying you." Both options made my stomach turn. Hiring an investigator seemed like the ultimate betrayal of trust. But confronting Sarah without proof might just lead to more lies and denials. "I need to know the truth," I told Jackson, "even if it breaks me." That weekend, I planned to have a serious conversation with Sarah. I arranged for Zoe to visit her grandparents so we could have the house to ourselves. I bought Sarah's favorite wine, and prepared myself mentally to hear things that might end our marriage. But when the moment came and I carefully broached the subject of the changes in our relationship, Sarah immediately became defensive. "Why do you see my personal growth as a threat?" she demanded. "Is your ego so fragile that you cannot handle me having an identity outside of being your wife?" I tried to explain that it was not the changes themselves that worried me, but the secrecy, the lying, the emotional distance. But before we could get to the heart of the matter, the front door opened. Zoe had returned early from her grandparents. She assessed the situation with one glance, taking in the wine glasses, my serious expression, and Sarah's defensive posture. "What is happening here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Your father thinks there is something wrong with me, because I am not acting like his perfect little housewife anymore," Sarah said before I could respond. Zoe turned to me, her eyes cold. "Are you seriously trying to manipulate Mom into feeling guilty for finding herself?" This is exactly what my psychology professor warned about. When women begin to reclaim their identity, the men in their lives often use emotional manipulation to force them back into their prescribed roles. "That is not what is happening here," I protested. But I was now facing two angry women instead of having the private conversation I had planned. The argument escalated quickly, with Zoe using psychological terminology to label my concerns as controlling behavior, while Sarah added examples of times I had supposedly stifled her growth throughout our marriage. By the time it was over, Sarah had grabbed her purse and stormed out, saying she needed space to think. She did not return until 3 in the morning, offering no explanation for where she had been. A week passed, with tension thick in our home. Sarah and I moved around each other like strangers, while Zoe watched me with suspicious eyes, as if I might at any moment reveal myself as the villain in their story of female empowerment. Then came the night that pushed me to my breaking point. Sarah announced she was meeting friends for dinner, dressed in a new black dress. I had never seen her makeup. Perfect, her new blonde hair styled elegantly. When she mentioned the restaurant, an upscale place downtown, something clicked in my mind. It was near the Langham Hotel where the key card had come from. After she left, I made a decision I never thought I would make in my 20 years of marriage. I followed my wife. I parked a block away from the restaurant and waited. At 7:30, I saw her enter alone. Through the large front windows, I watched as she was escorted to a table where someone was already waiting. A man. From my vantage point, I could see he was approximately my age, well-dressed with silver-streaked dark hair. As Sarah sat down, his face lit up, and he reached across the table to take her hand. The physical pain I felt watching another man touch my wife was unlike anything I had experienced before. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and my hands shook as I raised my phone to take pictures. I needed proof. Proof that I was not crazy, that my suspicions were justified. For 2 hours, I sat in my car, periodically watching them through the window. Their body language spoke of intimacy and excitement. She laughed more freely than she had with me in months. When they finally left the restaurant, they walked close together, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back in a gesture of familiarity that made my jaw clench. They walked to a nearby bar, and I followed at a distance, taking more photos. By 11, I could not bear to watch anymore. I drove aimlessly around Chicago for hours, the images of my wife with another man playing on repeat in my mind. Everything I had built my life around felt like it was crumbling. All the years, the memories, the trust evaporating in a single evening. I did not confront Sarah when she came home at 1 in the morning. Instead, I pretended to be asleep, planning my approach for the morning, when I would have the advantage of sobriety and daylight. The next morning, after Zoe left for her summer job at the campus bookstore, I laid the photos on the kitchen counter while Sarah made coffee. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. Sarah froze, then slowly turned to look at the images. Her face paled, but not with the guilt I expected. Instead, she looked confused, then angry. "You followed me?" she asked incredulously. "You actually stalked me." "Who is he, Sarah?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" She stared at me for a long moment, then, to my surprise, tears filled her eyes. Not tears of guilt, but of disappointment. "That is Dr. Alan Winters," she said finally. "He is the head of the English Literature Department at Northwestern. He has been helping me prepare my application for the master's program." I blinked, struggling to process her words. "Master's program? What are you talking about?" Sarah sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I was going to tell you when I knew if I had been accepted. I did not want to get your hopes up if it did not work out. But the hotel key, the late nights, all the secrecy I demanded." The hotel key was from the graduate program open house. They put prospective students up for the night so we could attend the early morning sessions, Sarah explained. "I did not tell you because I knew you would react exactly like this. Like I am betraying you by wanting something for myself." As she talked, pieces began falling into place. The writing group was to strengthen her application. The meetings with Dr. Winters were to discuss her thesis proposal and navigate the application process. The new confidence and appearance were part of her reclaiming the academic identity she had set aside to raise our daughter and support my career. "But why all the secrecy?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile this explanation with her behavior. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because 20 years ago, I gave up my dream of getting my master's and PhD to support your career and raise Zoe. I was afraid you would think I was being selfish for wanting it now. And Zoe encouraged me to pursue it for myself first to make sure it was really what I wanted before involving you." The shame hit me like a physical blow. Had I been so unsupportive that my wife could not share her dreams with me? Had I been so self-absorbed that I immediately assumed infidelity rather than personal ambition, yet doubts lingered? This explained some things, but not everything. Not the complete personality change, not the criticism of me, not the emotional distance. "What about us, Sarah?" I asked. "Why push me away while pursuing this?" Her eyes met mine, filled with a sadness that cut deeper than anger would have. "Because somewhere along the way, I lost myself in being your wife and Zoe's mother. I needed to figure out who I am now, before I could figure out what our marriage should look like going forward." That conversation was the most painful and honest we had ever had in 20 years together. It forced me to see things I had been blind to for too long. As I sat in our kitchen that morning looking at the stranger my wife had become, I realized I had a choice. I could continue fighting the changes, possibly losing her in the process, or I could find a way to evolve alongside her. Later that day, alone in my home office, I had a moment of clarity that changed everything. The problem was not that Sarah was changing. The problem was that I had stopped changing years ago. I had become so comfortable in our routines that I had stopped growing as a person. My resistance to her transformation was rooted in fear, not love. Fear of the unknown. Fear of not being enough for this new version of my wife. Fear of having to examine my own stagnation. That evening I made a decision that would either save our marriage or provide closure for its end. I would stop fighting Sarah's evolution and instead focus on my own growth. The next weekend, while Sarah was at a study group, I surprised her by enrolling us in a couple's dance class she had mentioned wanting to try years ago. When she returned home to find the confirmation email printed on the kitchen counter, her expression of shock quickly transformed into cautious delight. That is not all I told her. I have also scheduled a meeting with Dr. Winters to discuss how I can support your graduate studies. And I have found a therapist for myself to work through my insecurities and communication issues. Her eyes widened with each statement. Is this real? She asked. Or are you just trying to win me back? Both, I admitted honestly. I want to win you back by becoming the kind of partner who supports your dreams instead of feeling threatened by them. It was a turning point, but not an instant fix. The next steps were awkward and uncertain. The dance class revealed how out of sync we had become both physically and emotionally. We stepped on each other's toes, misread cues, and struggled to find our rhythm. But by the third week, something had shifted. We were laughing at our mistakes instead of tensing up. The physical connection of dance began rebuilding the intimacy we had lost. My meeting with Dr. Winters was humbling. He was not the romantic rival I had imagined, but a 60-year-old academic with a genuine interest in Sarah's scholarly potential. He spoke of her talent with such enthusiasm that I felt ashamed for ever doubting her motivations. He also suggested books I could read to better understand the literary theory Sarah was studying, creating a bridge between her new world and mine. The therapy sessions were perhaps the most challenging part. Examining my insecurities meant confronting uncomfortable truths about myself. I had to admit that part of my identity had become tied to being the provider, the stable one, the one with the answers. Sarah's independence threatened that self-image. Each session left me emotionally drained, but also lighter, as if I was shedding layers of armor I no longer needed to wear. As for my appearance, I decided it was time for some updates there as well. I got my first new haircut in 15 years, traded my outdated glasses for more contemporary frames, and allowed a personal shopper to revamp my wardrobe. The changes were subtle, but significant. When I came home with my new look, Sarah did a double take, then smiled in a way I had not seen in months. "You look good," she said, reaching out to touch my new shirt. "But what prompted this?" "If you can reinvent yourself, so can I replied. And honestly, it feels good to step outside my comfort zone. Zoe was the hardest to win over. She remained suspicious of my transformation, watching for signs that I would revert to controlling behavior. Our breakthrough came one evening when I asked her to explain some of the psychological concepts she had been studying. Instead of dismissing them as I had before, I listened, genuinely asking questions and acknowledging the validity of her perspective. By the end of our conversation, the ice in her eyes had thawed slightly. "Mom deserves to be happy," she said as we concluded our talk. "I agree," I replied, "and I am starting to understand that her happiness might look different than I imagined. But that does not mean it cannot include me." September brought a major milestone. Sarah received her acceptance letter to the master's program at Northwestern. When she read the email, she screamed with joy, then looked at me uncertainly as if bracing for disapproval. Instead, I hugged her tightly. "I am so proud of you," I whispered. "And to prove it, I have a surprise." I led her to my home office, which I had secretly renovated over the previous week. The space had been transformed into a study area with a new desk, comfortable chair, and bookshelves ready to be filled with academic texts. On the desk was a new laptop more powerful than her old one, with all the software she would need for her studies. "You did this for me?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "For us," I corrected. "This is the beginning of our new chapter together." That night, for the first time in months, we made love not as the people we had been for 20 years, but as the people we were becoming. There was discovery in our touch, a newness that reminded me of our early days together, but with the depth that only decades of history could provide. The coming months would not be easy. Sarah's graduate program was demanding, and balancing her studies with teaching and family life created new stresses. My own journey of self-discovery led to some difficult realizations about patterns I needed to change. We still argued, still hurt each other sometimes with careless words or actions. But the fundamental dynamic had shifted. We were no longer working against each other, but beside each other, each pursuing growth while maintaining our connection. One evening in late October, as Sarah and I sat on our back deck watching the sunset, Zoe joined us with 3 glasses of wine. "I have a confession to make," she said, looking slightly guilty. "I might have been a little harsh in my assessment of your marriage." I chuckled. "You think?" She shrugged. "In my psychology class, we learned all about dysfunctional family systems and how people get stuck in patterns. I came home looking for those patterns, and maybe I contributed to the tension instead of helping." Sarah reached over to squeeze her hand. "Your perspective forced us to confront issues we had been ignoring. It was uncomfortable but necessary." Zoe smiled. "Well, I have to say I did not expect this outcome. When most couples go through what you did, they either divorce or go back to their unhappy routines. You guys created something new instead. My professor would call that a transformative adaptation." We laughed at her terminology, but she was right. What had started as a painful disruption had become an opportunity for transformation. Sarah was pursuing her long-deferred dreams. I was breaking free from self-imposed limitations, and our marriage was evolving into something more equal, more authentic, and ultimately more loving. The woman I fell in love with 20 years ago had not disappeared. She had been there all along, waiting for the chance to continue her growth. And the man I needed to become had been waiting, too buried beneath comfortable routines and unexamined assumptions. Sometimes what looks like betrayal is actually an invitation to transformation. The key is being brave enough to accept that invitation, even when it terrifies you, even when it means admitting you have been wrong, even when it requires becoming someone new alongside the person you have always loved. What has been your experience with personal growth within a relationship? Has someone ever misunderstood your intentions when you were trying to improve yourself? Share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Remember, sometimes the biggest challenges in our relationships can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Thank you for listening, and I hope my story helps someone navigate their own journey of growth and understanding.